This shows you the chart from Dr. Sue, and it's posted in the article that I put online that's titled Microaggressions, Marginality, and Oppression. That's actually an introduction to a book that Dr. Sue has written. And I want to talk to you for a little bit about some of the base assumptions, the findings, and the key ideas that come out of that reading assignment. One of the main points that Dr. Sue wants to get across to you is that microaggressions can be either intentional or unintentional. And the important aspect of a microaggression is that there's a hidden message that is invalidating the group. It demeans individuals on the group level. It suggests they don't belong. And it also suggests that there's inferior status or that there should be inferior treatment of the group. So microaggressions are applied to what are known as marginalized groups. These are groups of people that are being pushed to the fringes of society, that are experiencing some sort of out-group experience or some kind of oppression by the dominant groups in society. And what Dr. Sue is trying to get across is that what is most detrimental about a microaggression is that oftentimes they are couched as if they are well-intended, so that they have a powerful psychological impact. Now, oftentimes microaggressions are based not only on racial categories, but also they can be gender-based, they can be relate to sexual orientation or gender identity, or also disability. So there's a wide variety of categories of individuals that experience microaggressions. They're not just based on racial attitudes. So again, the key point is that there's some sort of inferior status that's implied by the microaggression, and that it marginalizes, and that these types of statements have a cumulative effect over time. That's an important part of this, is that it's not just the one statement, it's experiencing this kind of commentary over and over through the course of a lifetime. So Dr. Sue says there's different types of impact that microaggressions have. One type of impact is what he calls imposition. And he says that's the act of imposing a label on someone. And there's another kind of impact that a microaggression have, and that's what's known as deprivation. And that would be depriving a group of jobs or education, health care, decent living conditions, something that we would all think of as an entitlement, but that certain groups are deprived of. One example that Dr. Sue gives of deprivation is when dominant members of society impose Western standards of civilization on other groups that have a different type of a culture, a different way of interacting socially. And so one example that Dr. Sue gives is speaking without emotion, expecting certain groups to speak without emotion because that's part of our dominant Western civilization culture in America. Or for other groups, being more participatory in group discussions. And so Dr. Sue would say that sometimes blacks are accused of being too emotional in the way that they interact with groups or the way that they speak. Or Dr. Sue also, another example that he gives is that Asians, whose culture dictate that one would be deferential out of respect to other people, that Western culture would identify Asians as not being as participatory as they should be in group discussions. So Dr. Sue would say that there's 3 different types of microaggressions. He calls those micro-assaults, micro-insults, and micro-invalidation. And so I'll talk about each one of those briefly. A micro-assault, a definition of a micro-assault, would be when the perpetrator harbors conscious bias towards the group. And that even in these instances, that sometimes it's not quite as obvious how assaultive the commentary or assaultive the action is. And so Dr. Sue says that some research suggests that socially devalued groups may find it easier to deal with old-fashioned bigotry, something that's just in your face and so obvious and so insulting that it's clearly an insult, versus trying to guess as to whether that was meant to be as assaultive. If you can't clearly identify that something was intended to be assaultive, then you're left wondering, is it your imagination? It's almost easier if something is clearly assaultive, clearly injurious, to give yourself permission to get angry or to give yourself permission to call somebody out. Dr. Sue also says there's something called a micro insult, and that occurs outside the level of conscious awareness of the perpetrator, that the perpetrator is not meaning to say something that is insulting, but they're trying to actually pay somebody a compliment or talk to them in a manner that will make them feel good about themselves. And that the micro insult often happens during an interpersonal interaction or comes through some sort of environmental cues. And a lot of times it's disguised as a compliment or some sort of a positive statement. So then the person who is being insulted doesn't know what to do about it. Do you challenge somebody when they're saying, well, I was just trying to compliment you, I was just saying something nice? When you sense that the intent of that statement really was to call attention to the inferior status of your group. And then Dr. Sue talks about micro-invalidations, and he said a great example of that is colorblindness. Because colorblindness is the unwillingness to see or acknowledge a person's race or color. So you're invalidating their experience. You're invalidating the discrimination they may have experienced. You're invalidating their oppressed status. And so what Dr. Sue would say is denying those differences is really a denial of the difference of power and privilege of the dominant group. So Dr. Sue talks about what he calls the denial of reality, or what he says you could see as a clash of realities. And his research has shown that students of color can identify a microaggression much more easily than the dominant group can. So that whites don't identify a statement as a microaggression, whereas if you're in that category of people, you understand or you get a sense of how insulting or how dehumanizing the comment is.